our only female, we had some hard thinking to do if we wished our pride to survive against the most aggressive wild lions we'd ever encountered. The animal orphanage in Nairobi was originally set up to look after any animals orphaned or abandoned, and then, when possible, to try to rehabilitate them. With cheetahs, it's difficult enough, but lions are almost impossible. That's why there are usually so many in the orphanage. I first saw a baby lion cub. It was a male, brought in only the previous week. He was living next to a baby leopard. He was almost irresistible, but unfortunately we weren't looking for male lions. He had the deepest growl I've ever heard. It was difficult to choose. I'd like to have taken them all, but so many would have made control impossible, and this could have been dangerous, apart from the immense problem of feeding them. Through the wire they seemed friendly enough. It was difficult to realize that never had they been associated with humans. I asked for 2 females, perfectly aware of their strange backgrounds. The request was granted. They took the journey well in the strange, coffin-like crates I had to have made to fit in the short-landing Britain Islander. Terence had been making for the past 6 months a bush landing strip about 8 hours' drive from George's camp. George was delighted. He called them Mona and Lisa. Now, at last, he really did have the basis of a possible pride. 2 males and 3 females. Boy and Christian, Juma, and now Mona and Lisa. We hoped after the disasters of the last few months, the situation would start to improve. Little did we realize the worst was yet to come. From the warmth of Christian's greeting, it seemed I'd chosen well. I must admit for a moment I felt like some shameless procurer engaged in feline slave traffic, bringing suitable concubines for regal pleasures. Christian, the young prince, just couldn't believe his good fortune. Mona and Lisa behaved according to the roles I'd given them, and were suitably provocative. But for several days yet, there must be wire between them. Christian looked casually resigned to the situation, and George was carefully casual too. But then there's hardly any better place than bed for making friends and influencing people. Mona and Lisa were unusual. They weren't exactly wild, like Juma. But they weren't exactly tame either. For several months they'd been stared at by thousands of visitors to the orphanage. They'd lost their fear of man, but that was all. They needed to get used to the sight, smell, and the sound of George's voice. The more friendship, the more you can control, and then the easier it is to shepherd them through the various stages of rehabilitation. Christian didn't like this unequal sharing out of George's favors. He was jealous and made an extravagant fuss of George, hoping to win his attention. If only Christian had realized. His caresses were double-edged. His rough, rasp-like tongue can remove hair and bring blood to the surface of the skin. George was bowled over by these terrible demonstrations of affection. What would happen if there was no wire? George debated for several days. Then, quite suddenly, he decided he had to find out. It was best to make some action they'd seen before, many times. So instead of giving them water through the wire, he took it in. This was the first time they'd ever had direct contact with humans. When they tried to bite, George simply told them to stop. They were surprisingly gentle considering the circumstances of their early life. Their parents had been shot as man-eaters. After such an unexpectedly good reception, George felt it was safe to let Christian into their compound. But their friendship had now been superseded by a desire to protect their territory, and as Christian hadn't been sharing it, he found himself no longer a prince, but a pauper. It was all very confusing for him with his attitude of make love, not war. Best to forget that, try another approach, thought George, and with Terence's help, Christian made a quick but rather undignified exit. Boyers had a lot of experience with young lionesses. He's usually generous, and the territory was his. Unfortunately, he'd left a scrap of meat around, and that started things off on the wrong foot. Boy wasn't going to lose his composure over a couple of females, however beautiful. He didn't need to demonstrate. He knew he had the power, and it wasn't his nature to be vicious. As Mona and Lisa groveled at Boy's feet, Christian and Juma watched open-mouthed at this majesty. What had he got that they hadn't? George and I talked about the little cub at the orphanage, but another male was out of the question. When he arrived and let out his first full-blooded growl, George realized he was exceptional. And from that moment he was called Super Cub. After a week, when he had been accepted by our lions, George opened the gate to freedom. Juma, the wild one, scooted out first. She now occasionally visited Boy's compound, but only at night. George was now completely accepted by Mona and Lisa. They seemed fascinated with his well-scratched legs. The expression of their newfound liberty knew no bounds, and as the rain